What's up, guys? Answering another one of your questions here. So this one, a little more broad, but I'm not sure what to call it, but for lack of a better term, let's call it non-specific all-around training for life. I do lots of sports, cross-country skiing, mountain climbing, backpacking, weightlifting, cycling. Have a decent home gym created during COVID. I'm not trying to break any records or any races, just want to good overall functional fitness. The day I keel over and die. Okay, a lot about races, climb every year, 3,200 foot climb over 1.8 miles. I don't want to win that for my age group. With this question, it's very non-specific, right? Just like having like functional fitness or having the fitness and strength for life, essentially. So this is where I think having a more phase potentiated or kind of like phase-based training makes more sense. So kind of like block style periodization where you have like emphasis for certain cycles, for example, because what that does is it allows you to work certain qualities at certain times a little harder while putting others on the back burner. So for example, you might have a 8 or 12 week period where you're really focusing on your squat strength. You might have like an 8 or 12 week period where you're focusing on your bench press or pressing strength. It might be a pushing and pulling strength. There's a lot of ways to organize this, so these are all just examples. You might have like a 12 or 16 week phase where you're working on just your endurance, where you're doing it either more often or for more time. But that's really how I would structure it and think about it, is to have phases. So the phases I'll make for sure at the very least would be a strength phase, I'll do an endurance phase, and I would do even for you, even someone older, I'd still do a hypertrophy phase, for example. And you kind of like play around with those three, because then you can really change your rep ranges in the way that makes sense, right? So for strength, you want lower reps. For hypertrophy, you want more like moderate reps, although you could have hypertrophy with high or low reps. The moderate tend to work a little bit better. And then higher repetitions for like GPP, general physical preparation, for conditioning, for endurance. And that endurance block, we're gonna hit more of that style, like running, cross-country skiing, that kind of stuff is in there. And the thing to keep in mind with this style of training, which is called concurrent training, because you're working everything at once, is your progress is going to be a little bit slower because you got to work more things at the same time. But using this structure, we kind of block stuff up and still kind of put other things in the back burner. So in the endurance phase, you might be doing 4 days a week of some type of cardio or endurance training. It might be intervals, might be just be long, still steady state, depends what you need to work on. And then when you go put it on the back burner to go to your strength phase, for example, you might only do 2 days of cardio or 3 days of cardio, or just do like 4 days, but lower volume, right? You might not do like a 45-minute session, you might do a 20-minute session, or you might do like just some intervals, for example. So that's kind of how, like, generally broadly speaking, to lay it out. It obviously depends how many days a week you're training, how serious you are about certain other goals. But the very simple template I would use, I would superset your A1, A2 movements, so like a pull and a push for upper body day. And the lower body day, you could just have like a squat, for example, or a lunge-based pattern is perfectly fine. You can either alternate between the two or just stick with one for a whole cycle. Again, there's a lot of different things you could do. If you're training 4 times a week, though, with lifting and conditioning, for example, I would probably use an upper-lower split, or upper one day, lower another day, full body a third day works well, and then have like 1, 2, or 3 separate conditioning days with it. You could do full body every day, and that way you're spreading your volume a little bit. So do 2 or 3 full body training sessions a week, and then the rest are conditioning. Maybe you have like a body weight kind of endurance-based session in there as well. It really depends how many days a week you're doing it. And one thing to keep in mind with the programming, you really have to stick to pretty much just compound movements when you're doing this, because if you're training so many qualities simultaneously, like you just don't really have the time for bicep curls. You know what I mean? Like you got to train the big primary movers, like your presses, like your rolls, like your pulls, for example. So you don't have much time for accessories, but that doesn't mean to ignore them completely. You might just only do them for 2 or 3 sets at the end of 1, maybe 2 sessions in a week. And it's kind of like problem points that you alternate, right? Like if you have issues with your shoulders, you might do some shoulder work one day for 2 to 4 weeks. You might do some bicep work or direct arm work, for example, for about like 2 to 4 weeks on another block. Or you might do that in a separate day. You might do it in the warm up. You might use something like giant sets to sneak in that volume. So again, a lot of different ways to do it. But how I would do it, I'd probably do either, if I'm training, like lifting 4 days a week, upper lower is great. For you, if your recovery is impacted, full body 2 or 3 times a week can be great. You just have to figure out a way to make it work. If you're doing full body, I'll do a lower body movement paired with an upper body movement as a superset. So like a squat, some kind of pressing movement. Then we do some kind of hinge, some kind of pulling movement. That's day 1. Day 2 is the same structure basically, but now we just change the movements. So that's a super simple way to do it. And then your C series, your C1, C2, that'd be your accessories, or I would do a giant set there. So a 3, maybe 4 movement series. So that way you have more accessories, you get them in less time. You work on your overall conditioning because you're keeping the rest lower in that period as well. So hope that kind of answers your question. It's a very complicated one without more details. And there's a lot we can kind of go in on this. especially for the endurance stuff. I think the important thing is to continue doing it year round. Incorporate some intervals as well. Don't be afraid to do stuff that you don't typically do, like a rower, like a skier, like running if you don't really do it, or incorporate hill runs, for example, just to take some of the stress off the joints. Might feel better. So especially intervals, like 30 second, 1 minute intervals on a hill run. You just need a large enough hill. Those can be really great. It's even at like a 60s, 70s, like that type of like later age life. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, or if you got any questions specifically, drop them in the comments here. I'll try to answer them the best I can.